Thank you for listening to the Distinguished Physical Education Podcast, where we discuss best practices in PE and share expert insights from thought leaders in the PE community. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to take a minute to share an awesome professional development opportunity coming up this summer. The Colorado Health and Physical Education Council is hosting its annual Health and PE Summit on June 4th and 5th at Jefferson High School in Edgewater, Colorado, just a few miles outside of Denver. This event brings together PE teachers, district coordinators, and passionate educators from across the state to exchange ideas and walk away with practical strategies that can make an immediate impact on your teaching. I had the privilege of presenting last year, and I'm excited to be back again this year. One of the things I love most about this summit is its focus on high-quality instructional strategies. If you're looking for ways to refine your teaching and connect with other educators who are just as passionate about PE as you are, this is the place to be. It's also completely free, so mark your calendar for June 4th and 5th, and be sure to register using the link in the episode description. I hope to see you there. My guest today is Patrick Noel. Patrick received his Bachelor of Science degree in Physical Education from St. Bonaventure University and his Master's of Arts in Kinesiology, with a PE emphasis from Fresno Pacific University. He is in his 19th year of teaching for Fairfax County Public Schools, the largest school system in Virginia and 11th largest in the nation. He has taught at the elementary level for 16 of those years, with the other 3 coming at the high school level. Patrick has experience teaching at 5 different elementary schools, 1 high school, and has been at his current school, Colvin Run Elementary, since 2020. This past December, he earned his national board certification in early and middle childhood physical education. In this episode, we discuss the importance of Speak Out Day and how teachers can advocate for high-quality PE programs, what the process of earning national board certification looks like, and the impact it can have on one's teaching. And now I bring you Patrick Noel. Patrick, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Gary. Good to be here.
You were telling me that you went to Speak Out Day, and I was hoping that maybe for folks who aren't that familiar with it, can you explain what the purpose of Speak Out Day is and why it's important for PE and health educators to be involved?
Our national organization, Shape America, I believe it's been about 15 years that they started advocating, and they would have a day where they convened on Capitol Hill, and they set up meetings for all of the attendees with their respective senators, congressmen, House representatives as a way to advocate for educational funding, advocate for needs that surround the health and PE community. This was my first time attending in person. I live right in Northern Virginia, so it's more or less in my backyard. I've become a lot more kind of connected and involved in the broader PE community over the last couple of years. And so I decided to make the jump and attend this year, even though I wouldn't necessarily say advocacy was something that I have a passion in. I know the importance of it, but just my personality isn't something that I'm gung-ho about, but I know that it's important to do. From my personal experience with the day yesterday, our meetings were very positive. Fortunately for us, the senators and congressmen, their staffers that we met with, they have long been supporters of educational funding. And so those meetings were more or less thanking them for that support and giving them our asks for upcoming votes and whatnot, just to continue to push for the funding, especially given kind of the current scope of where education is right now. As I said, over the last 15 years or so, there's been a lot of progress made, which is something that I've had to remind myself of. While my particular meetings may not have had a large scale impact because of the support that our congressmen have already shown us, a lot of our other colleagues from different areas, their meetings were much more having to be persuasive and trying to educate as to why the funding for health and PE is so important because of the quality programs that we provide. Many of the other kind of leaders in our profession over the past few years.
On behalf of the PE teachers who are listening, I just want to thank you for spending the time to do that. And it's great to hear that you had some productive conversations with your congressmen and senators. Obviously, this is a localized thing in DC. For PE teachers who weren't able to make it to the event, what are some things that they might be able to do in order to advocate for health and PE?
One of the biggest things is just sending emails to those district representatives, your senators, your congressmen, and just asking them to support the educational funding in specific Title I, Title II, and Title IV-A, which is for student support and academic enrichment grants. And even just sending those emails is a small step. On the Shape America website, and I know a lot of the state association websites, they have ways to advocate. And then obviously, if you're really interested, just paying attention to some of the education bills that are coming across your specific state and being able to send follow-ups and advocate of voting yes this way or voting no that way. So simple emails. One thing that was eye-opening is just the amount of staff that the congressmen have that are working their tails off, taking how many meetings a day, following up with phone calls and emails. So you may feel like it's hard to reach that person directly, but they have a lot of people who are flagging things, and enough emails come through over a certain topic, they're going to make sure that they pass that on to the people who need to hear it.
The only thing that I think I would add to that is over at the Health and PE Collective, they've been having a pretty big conversation about other ways that you can advocate for policies that would improve health and physical education. So for those folks who aren't members yet, be sure to check out the Health and PE Collective. The main topic that we're here to talk about today is your journey towards getting national board certified. I'm pretty unfamiliar with the process, and I'm betting that a lot of listeners are too. Can you share a little bit about what the process looks like?
So it is broken down into 4 components, and you've got 3 years once you start to attempt all 4 of the components. Each component is weighted differently, and so there's a weighted score that you have to achieve, and then there's a minimum score that you would have to get for each of the components. I decided to do 2 out of the 4 components that first year that I decided to do it. The first component is probably closest thing to relate it to is the praxis exam. So it's a content knowledge. There's a section on multiple choice, and then there's a few written response questions.
And are those physical education specific?
Yes. So it's content knowledge of PE, and then different scenarios, like how would you design a lesson for a 5th grade student who is trying to improve his muscular strength and endurance. So there were a couple different questions like that. The other one that I did was related on like your instructional delivery. So I had to videotape 2 of my lessons and submit them. But the biggest thing throughout the whole process is the written commentary. So they have very specific questions that they are needing answers to, but all of them are centered around you being reflective on your practice. So what standards is this hitting? Why is it important? Why did you make these decisions in this lesson? I've heard so many people just call it such a transformative experience because it really is. And that's what I really found that I loved about it, was that different than going to get another master's or, a PhD or whatever. Like, I have my master's, but I really can't tell you a whole lot that I actively am using from that. Whereas the national board process, it's all centered around me and my teaching practice and how I can be the best for my students. How can I improve the student experience in my classrooms?
It sounds like it's 100% job embedded. This is like the 3rd or 4th episode in a row, I think, that I've spoken to my guest about the importance of being a reflective teacher and thinking about the changes that you can make from day to day or from lesson to lesson. What are the 3rd and 4th components?
So the ones that I did, the test was component 1, the other one was component 3. And then, so component 2 is on assessment and kind of how you differentiate your instruction based off of the assessments. So there's 2 different units that you show your assessments, a pre-assessment. What knowledge did you gain from that assessment? Why did you choose these students? Because they don't want you to show like, oh, these are my best kids. They want to see somebody who is excelling at that unit and somebody who is not quite excelling at that unit? And what did you do to make sure that all of those students were still having some way to grow? So it's that pre-assessment, how you analyze the data, what steps you take, how that drives your instruction. And then obviously your more summative assessment of like, did your instruction actually work and serve the purpose of the goals that you were trying to get? And if it did, great. If it didn't, what could you do differently next time you teach that lesson or teach that unit? So at the end of each component, that's one of the last questions is, if you were doing this again, how would you do it differently? So it's just that constant reflective piece.
In this conversation, I'd like to split up the impact that this process had on your learning environment and then also on your instruction. So you mentioned differentiation a little bit. That might be something that we come back to a little bit later in the conversation. Can you share with me how this process shifted your perspective on how you create an effective learning environment in your PE classes?
It all comes down to knowing your students and starting off with building those relationships with them and just kind of knowing what makes them tick, how they are individually, but also how they are as a larger group, because no two of your classes are going to be the same. And so you're going to be teaching that same lesson to all of your fifth grade classes, but you know that this group that is coming on this day, like they're a little bit squirrelier. So your classroom management strategies may be different. Whereas, this class behaviors aren't ever a problem. So you know that you can let your guard down a little bit. You can be a little bit kind of lenient with them because it's not really going to be a behavior problem. And so you can focus more on a little bit of the skills. We always, especially with our older kids, we'll try and emphasize if we as teachers have to spend our time teaching your behavior, we're not getting as much done. If you take care of the behavior part, we can focus on the skill and the content that we're trying to teach you.
The goal with having an effective learning environment, the end goal, in my opinion, is always that we're trying to maximize instructional time and maximize activity time for students. Do you have any specific classroom management strategies that you either learned during this process or were forced to reflect on that have had an impact on those two areas in your classes?
Routines. One of the biggest things I always remind our students of is if we do it right the first time, we don't have to spend time doing it over. And that'll go for individual students. That'll go sometimes for an entire classes. We had the second grade group come in today to get into the gym and get themselves ready for PE. And it was way too loud and lined them right back up on their line. And I said, we can go kind of one of two ways. We can go all the way back out in the hallway and try coming back in. Or from your lines right now, you can show me that you know what you're supposed to be doing. And that's all it took. And then we got through the rest of the lesson. But it's also coming back to that. We finished up with our class and we said, you know what? Yeah, class is over now. Like 30 minutes is 30 minutes, no matter if we are playing for 25 of those minutes or if we're playing for 7 of those minutes. Like the time of start and stop doesn't change just because of how we come into the gym. So we could have gotten a lot more done if we didn't have to have that little reset.
It sounds like in this particular case, all you had to do was warn them that you were going to turn the car around, but you didn't actually have to do that. 2 questions for you. What does it look like if you have to take that reset to the next level? And then the other question is, how do you decide when you need to do a certain level of reset? Is it a certain number of students that are exhibiting off-task behavior? Is it a safety thing? What are the signs that you look for in order to know I need to do this reset, line students up on the sideline, or I need to do this reset, which is the next step after that?
We don't really have a set number, but it's just a feel for, can this be done with calling a specific student or two out to redirect their behavior? Or is that going to take more time? If we had to ask every single student who wasn't quite ready, that's going to take a lot longer than, hey, let's do a quick line back up and then we'll go from there. And they got lined up and they were quiet. And it was almost just like you said, a quick reset. Had they still been squirrely or chatty as we had lined up in that line, then it would have been taken out. to that next level of like, all right, we're not ready to be even physically in the gym right now. And so we need to come back out and start over.
I'd love to drill into that just a little bit deeper. So when you take students out into the hallway, what does that reset sound like?
It's largely a reminder of what should your body look like? What should your body sound like to let Miss Mallon and I know that you are ready for PE. And we are very fortunate where a simple come back out and not even yelling, but just, I think it's almost more impactful where you can just have you as the teacher still staying calm and being like, look, these are our expectations. We don't need to yell at you to do them. We just need you to understand we cannot move on unless you are in the right mindset to be in PE. Because if you're not, then our number one priority of safety is going to be jeopardized, right? Because if you're talking, you're not going to understand what to do, or the people around you are going to miss out on some of those important instructions. If you can't control your body, then there's a higher likelihood that you are going to injure yourself or injure somebody else. And we don't have very many rules in PE. It's whatever you do, you need to keep yourself, your classmates, and our equipment safe.
I think that a lot of teachers, and myself included, you default to raising your voice. And I can't remember a single time where losing my cool in a class ever had a positive impact on their behavior. I think, though, that some people just don't have an alternative. So it's really powerful to hear you say you just need to remind students of what the expectations are. You might even ask students some questions, like you mentioned. What will your body look like when you re-enter the gym? What will you sound like when you're sitting on your home base spots or lined up on the black line, or whatever your entry procedure looks like? I had a teacher about 10 years ago share with me that her favorite word in these situations was unfortunately, because it stopped her from losing her cool and it also made her laugh a little bit. So you're in the middle of this situation that you didn't plan for. This isn't what you envisioned your lesson looking like. And you're realizing that it's not a manageable situation like you mentioned. It's not just redirecting one or two students. We need to kick into the reset process. And she said that she would just say, unfortunately, and that would calm her down and remind her that her job is to just communicate her expectations. So she would say, unfortunately, I noticed that some students were, and then she would name the things that she saw, repeat the expectations, and then ask students to repeat them back to her before either letting everyone back in the gym. Sometimes you're in a situation where you need to gradually release students back into the gym. Can the blue line show us what it looks like to walk into the gym at a voice level 0 and sit in their spots, and so on? So I just think it's powerful for you to communicate that and to share that with teachers so that they have a plan for when these things happen. So often teachers allow unsafe or off-task behaviors to happen because they just don't know what it would look like to have a plan to correct them. Were there any other classroom management or learning environment strategies that you want to share to people? You mentioned routines. You talked about potential resets and how to communicate expectations to students. Were there any other learning environment insights that you had from your national board process that you want to share with us?
I've noticed really that I'd say probably over the last 3-4 years, I have become much less strict when doing group activities to have the set number. And there's so many teachers that I've talked to that just one student is responsible for certain changes in your practice. A few years ago, I had a second grader. We were doing our dribbling unit, and we said, all right, groups of 3. And there were 4 boys that wanted to be together. And the one boy wasn't a part of the group, and he got really upset about it and made the choice to remove himself from the activity. It was very, very upset. Couple months later, we were doing a different activity. All right, lines of 3, just because of the space that we had, the number of kids that we had in the group, groups of 3 made it easiest. Sure enough, he was still that one. And so he removed himself again. And at that point, I was like, I went over to the group that I knew that he wanted to be in. And I said, hey, can you go over and just invite him to be a part of your group? And he came over beaming, had a great time. And it was just at that moment that I realized that, like, why? Why is it so important that we have to have 3? Yes, it could make things easier, But I realized that that student right there, if they're in a group of 4, the worst that's going to happen, they have to wait one extra turn, but they get to be with their friends. So they're more engaged in the lesson. Removing that one student just to have an even number, that person's not having a good time because they're not with their friends, no matter what the game or activity is really going to be. If you're in groups of 3 and he's that 4th person or she's that 4th person, like they're not focused on the activity. They're focused on, I'm not with my friends. And the fact of the matter is, if they're with their friends, they don't care about waiting an extra turn. As much as possible, I let them kind of choose their group sizes, and they appreciate that. They know that they're going to have that chance to kind of work with their friends, but at the same time, that also has become a bargaining chip, so to speak, where we're giving you this opportunity to show responsible behavior within this group setting of choosing who you want to work with, but you need to show that responsible behavior. When that stops, we're going to lose that opportunity to choose who you're working with, and we will set those parameters a little bit stricter.
In the last episode, I talked about student choice and how you can motivate middle school students by providing students with choices. So I'm really happy to hear you talk about it with elementary school students as well. And it sounds like you have parameters set for students. You're not just going to give them choices that might take them away from their goals for the day, but you're thinking about your end goal, which in this case was to include everyone and give students the opportunity to engage in the activity, and providing students with choices within that. And in this case, it was just changing the number of the groups. You don't really care if it's 2 students or if it's 4 students, if the trade-off is that every student is engaged versus having some students feel like they're being left out of the activity. So I think it's a great example to share with teachers how you can do a little bit of give and take within certain confinements.
And have you been noticed, it's just the other day we had an activity, and a kind of unintentional byproduct of that is so often you get some of these kids who may struggle to advocate for themselves or like ask to be a part of a group. So they end up as part of that group that's only got 1 or 2. But then we get some of these kids who are they're like, you know what? I want more turns. So, hey, can I go join that group that only has 2 people? I don't want to be in this group of 7. And then, like I said, unintentionally, that makes those students who may not always feel as welcome, having people come and join their group just, is another added bonus.
Thanks for sharing some classroom management strategies, things that you've reflected on over the course of your national board certification process. Let's shift over to instructional strategies. So what are some things that you prioritized during this process that we would house in the instructional half of things?
A couple of years ago, I had approached our technology specialist and said, is there any way we can get some sort of different projector set up? Because we would use a projector as needed, but we had to roll it out into the middle of the gym. And it was like in our playing space in order to have anything visual projected up on the wall. And she took it and ran with it. And about 1.5 years later, our principal had asked for some big ticket requests because our 20th anniversary was coming up and we were doing a big fundraiser for that. And so part of it was getting a projector installed in the gym. So we now have, it's basically a movie theater projector because it's on one sideline right at half court on that wall in a cage. So the unit itself is very safe and secured. And on the other opposite wall, we have a 13-foot diagonal wide screen that's remote. So it drops down during the day. We put it back up. And so we have really dove into having visuals constantly up on the board. So we have basically it's a digital whiteboard planner that my co-teacher and I use and gives them their instant activity or warm up that we're doing. We typically use pictures or GIFs so the kids can have an idea, but not necessarily know the full scope of what we are doing. And it's fun to kind of see them come in and kind of look and try and figure out based off of the pictures that they see what they're going to be doing. We have our fitness focus, and then we have you might be familiar with like the what, why, and how concept. So like, why are we learning this? How are we going to know? How are you going to know that you are meeting those objectives? So that's where we use our I can statements that we have posted up there for our objectives for the day.
It sounds like a good balance between resources that students can use, whether they're gifts up on the wall or things that can just motivate students to be excited about PE today. And then also things like the what, why, and how, which some of your older elementary students might refer to those, but sometimes that's just super helpful for the teacher themselves to be able to look back, see that projected on the wall and say, oh yeah, you know what, maybe I should remind students during this next pause in the activity why we're learning what we're learning today, or make some sort of connection back to our objective. So I think it works well for both the students and the teachers. Have you found that as well?
Yeah, for sure. And even today, we had just started our jump rope unit. And for our upper grades, basically our objective was I can jump consecutively with a self-turned rope. So we talked about that at the beginning. And I even made a change after our 6th grade classes for our 5th and 4th grade classes, where we talked about we're going to try and jump consecutively, but then we did a challenge of how many total jumps you can do in a minute. And the second class that I had, as I was explaining it, the thought popped into my head. I was like, if our focus is on consecutive jumps, why aren't we having them keep track of consecutive jumps? And we talked about, for your skill level, 3 could be successful for you if this is the first time you're really ever touching a jump rope. But like 100 in a row might be that challenge for the student next to you. So we kind of let them determine their definition of consecutive jumps and what their measurement of success for is that. But for our remaining classes, rather than do that, all right, you've got a minute, count your total number of jumps. It was like, you've got this minute, what's your best score of consecutive jumps? Just so that even throughout the class, we were able to reiterate the idea of the consecutive jumps. And then we would stop them, and we talked about ways to maximize that and make your jumps more efficient, focusing on a smoother turn and easier jump where you're not slamming down on your feet. You're not jumping up so high where you're able to conserve your energy. We talked about those things. Now that those things are fresh in your mind, let's see, your only goal this time is to see if you can get one more than your best score the first time. So just having that as, like you said, a reminder for us as the teachers to like, this is what we're trying to achieve. Like, why are we asking them to do A, B, and C, but then we're letting them do X, Y, and Z?
So it sounds like based on that reflection, you were able to better align your activities and your questioning with the actual objective that you wanted students to make progress towards for that day. You just touched on something that I absolutely want to dig a little bit deeper into. The first chapter in part 2 of the book on content and language objectives. That's a very unique expectation that we have here in DPS, where students have to make progress towards something physically, like you just said, consecutive jump ropes, and that they also have to use language to articulate their learning. And I was just so excited to hear you say that you give students opportunities to verbalize their learning as well. So in your lesson, it sounds like you had 2 goals. One was that students were going to get better at jumping rope and be able to do consecutive jumps. And then there was another goal where students may have had to describe how they were going to get better, describe some of the strategies or some of the cues for jumping rope. Is that an expectation that you have for students, that they're also able to articulate their learning, or are you just looking for physical improvement?
We don't typically, I would say, have that as a learning goal. We provide them opportunities for that so that those students who can understand all of those concepts, but for whatever reason, they don't have the coordination or haven't had as much skill practice, they could tell you everything that they need to do, even though they may struggle with the demonstration of that skill. That goes just as far at this point, because the reality of it is most of our kids we see an hour a week. And in that time, so many of our kids are active in other ways, but may not focus on the skills that we're teaching outside of school. So if they're only being exposed to some of these skills an hour a week, I don't know that that's really feasible for them to make that amount of progress in that time, unless they are going out and doing more practice outside of that. So like you said, that ability for them to at least understand the concepts and be able to say, yeah, if I want to be better, I need to focus on maybe keeping my elbows in tighter and using my wrists, or landing softly on the balls of my feet as opposed to slamming down on my heels. That's going to help my jump rope be a little bit more efficient.
I think you just laid out the perfect case for why what we would call language objectives is so important in PE, because it also ties back to what you mentioned earlier about differentiation. You're providing students with another avenue for demonstrating their learning. So yes, some students might be able to make progress in the amount of times they can jump rope, whereas other students, like you said, we only have 20 minutes that we're going to be doing this in class. They might not make that much progress in 20 minutes or less. So you're giving them another opportunity to demonstrate their learning, and that's going to be through language and answering questions that you ask them. A lot of the work that I do with the teachers that I coach is on implementing accountable and efficient opportunities for students to communicate in PE so that they can do exactly what you just described, not just show something physically, but also be able to articulate it. And honestly, I thought that that was probably going to be one of the things that I got the most pushback from readers of the book. But I've received messages from people saying, I've been teaching for 10 or 12 years. I feel like I've been doing the same things pretty consistently over the course of my career, and I've been looking for that next thing that's going to bump up my instruction. And providing students with opportunities not just to do things physically, but to articulate that they're learning our standards-based concepts or objectives. That's the next thing that I'm going to work on. And then, of course, that opens up a dozen doors to, like, how do you hold students accountable to talking in an efficient manner about the question you're asking? How do you plan for the questions that you're going to ask students? How do you track some of that data? That's a conversation for a whole nother time. You did mention communicating objectives as one of the things that you were reflecting on in this process. Do you have different ways that you communicate your objectives? How do you ensure that students understand what it is that they're going to make progress towards that day?
Like I said, we have it up on our giant screen as they walk in, so they have that visual of it. We often will utilize walk-in talks centered around the objectives for today, either as a warm-up activity or as a closure activity to reinforce. So it may be leading questions of what strategies or what ways you going back to the jump rope, walk and talk at the beginning of class as a warm-up, like, what do you know that you can do to be successful at jump rope, to be able to jump consecutively? Like, what are some of those skill cues? And they just come in and walk and talk. Or we'll use it as a little bit of an exit ticket kind of cool down. So we've gone over it, and then that walk and talk is centered around, what did we learn today? How do you know that you were successful? Like, what was your basis for success during that lesson?
There's a list actually that I created with a colleague of mine, and I'll share it in the description in this episode, of questions or prompts that you could give students during a walk and talk in the very beginning of class to get them thinking about the objective. So they might do exactly what you just said, come in the gym and read the objective on the board, and then have a question that they're going to talk about with a partner as they walk around. Some of those questions were, put today's objective in your own words, or how will you know that you've made progress towards today's objective by the end of our lesson? Tying back to differentiation, which we talked about today, what supports might you need in order to be successful in today's lesson? So you might get some great answers from students. They might say, well, yesterday I used the jump rope that was way too long for me, so today I'm going to try to get a shorter jump rope. That's a great example of differentiating for students' needs. They might say that you had a GIF up on the wall yesterday, but then you took it down because you had another picture you wanted to show them. And they found that they were more successful when they were able to refer back over to that on the wall. So, hey, Mr. Noel, can you put that GIF back up on the wall? Because that's what's going to help me make progress today. So it can be really impactful to give students those opportunities to think a little bit about the objective and what success is going to look like and what they might need in order to be successful. I think at the end of the day, what we want to get away from is just saying the objective one time to students. Today, we're going to be learning blank and then moving on quickly. We want to make sure that that message is not only sent, but that students receive the message, that they understand what progress towards the objective is going to look like. Today, you shared some examples of things that you learned and reflected on during your national board certification process. Can you talk a little bit about the difference that some of those strategies have made in your students' learning? What are some things that you've noticed?
It kind of comes back to providing student choice as often as possible so that the students feel that they are much more in control of their own individual learning. I was doing a pickleball lesson last year, and it was at the beginning, and so we were going through our skills. And I had a student in particular who would frequently get frustrated, and his way of dealing with that was just kind of taking a break, removing himself from the activity, but at the same time made it very clear that like he also struggled with competition type things. And so we were starting to go through the lesson and tapping the ball to yourself in different ways. And then as we started to progress with finding a partner, I was like, if you feel like you want to go with a partner or challenge a partner, find a partner and do this. If you would prefer to continue working on your own. And I was surprised that not only him, but there were multiple students who chose to continue working on their own. As we still progressed to hitting up against the wall, I kind of just prefaced everything of, if you're ready, if you feel like you want the next challenge, here's what they are. So just providing those scaffolded steps of, here's where we're starting. If you feel ready, go ahead. Here's the next step. If you feel like you need to continue working at those previous steps to get yourself comfortable, I am totally fine with that. As long as we are working on those skills and as long as we are staying safe, that's fine with me. So that kind of has blossomed and throughout most of our units now, just providing them those choices. If you want to work by yourself, you're welcome to do so. If you want to work in these groups to work on your skills, you're welcome to do so. Because we have so many kids who are super competitive and always need to know what the score is and always need to know whether or not they won or lost. Here's the point system. I always preface it. If you care about points, if you don't care about points, I don't care about points. Like they're going to disappear into thin air at the end of class anyway. But again, reaching those students who need that motivation of, I got to score. I got to be better than that group next to us. And so just providing those choices of how they want to show their learning, how they want to keep track of their learning, how they want to show their success, giving them different parameters for their success, whether it's the hula hoop closest to you is worth 1 point, but if you go for this one back there, that's worth 1,000 points. It's giving them a way to choose their challenge level, choose how they can best feel successful.
So lots of opportunities for student choice and differentiation. What do you notice in students as a result of you implementing these things consistently?
They're finding more success. And because they're finding more success, they are more engaged in building their skills. And I've also noticed that when you provide kids with options for challenges, I'm still amazed at how many kids opt for the highest challenge level, even if their skill level might not be ready to consistently show success at that level. Kids want to be challenged online. People recognize me as the trick shot guy. Over COVID, started making trick shots and turned that into some convention conference sessions. And I presented in Baltimore on adding trick shots and more or less adding different challenge levels and providing your kids ways to fail in particular, like set failure as that expectation so that you get away with that stigma and they can just focus on being excited and working at how they want to challenge themselves to be successful. So we are always constantly like providing these absurd challenges for our kids, and they always want to try them because they get so excited when they actually are successful with them.
Yeah, so they get to experience success, but they also realize that failure is just a normal part of the learning process. I want to go back to your national board certification for a moment and give you an opportunity to share some advice with teachers who might be considering this process.
I would let them know that it's the most transformative process as an educator. Like, it's hard for a reason, but that reason is worth it. That reason is you're investing in you as a teacher. And because you're investing in you, that also means you're investing in your students. And that is the end goal. I want to be a PE teacher because it's what I love doing. And I want to be a PE teacher because I want to provide my students with the best possible PE experience. And so going through this process, you're betting on yourself because you want to provide your kids with meaningful opportunities to grow, find enjoyment in whatever ways you want to move and be active and be healthy, that you can continue on well beyond the 7 years that you're going to have me as a teacher.
It's nice to hear that not only was this a personal goal of yours, but that you make that connection back to your students as well, being the best teacher that you can be for the good of your students. Patrick, you mentioned just a little bit earlier about your online presence. Do you have anything that you would want to share with listeners? I can always add Instagram or Twitter handles in the description.
If you want to check out all of the trick shots that I've made, those are housed on my TikTok account. It's at Mr. Noel's Trick Shots, or more of PE content on X, Twitter. It's at PM_Noel is my handle there. I know in a lot of your other guests, you've asked for other advice. That would probably just general advice for teachers. I would say get connected with other teachers, professionals online. That has really, over the last couple of years, but really in the last year, I've got really close and connected with a group of teachers who is, from an online standpoint and even just around the country, like state, district, national teachers of the year, all in this group and learning network where we are constantly sharing ideas and just having that group of common people. Success leaves clues, and like surrounding yourself with the people who you strive to be like has exponentially elevated my career over this last year. So, I mean, get connected with as many people as you can who share your passion and your kind of goals as an educator.
Yeah, there's a lot of good that can come from social media, and sometimes we all need to be reminded of that because it's easier to highlight some of the bad that's out there. But connecting with teachers from across the globe who share a vision of high quality PE, just like you do, is obviously one of the main benefits. Patrick, you've been very generous with your time. It was a pleasure talking PE with you tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.